My name is Jonathan White. I'm an actor and a writer.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks a million for taking part in the Access Chats.
My pleasure.
Come here. I suppose what I've asked or started with most people is take me back to Jonathan White as a wee gossin. Was it always something that you feel you were kind of into or involved in? Like, was it in your family? Was it around you?
It was around me to the extent that my uncle, T.P. McKenna, was an actor and was a celebrated actor of the time. But growing up, I didn't get a chance to see an awful lot of that because he was based in the UK from the mid-60s. He went over with Stephen D in the mid-60s and stayed there. So the person I really give credit to is Neil Tobin. For a formative period of my life, we lived in New York and in a strange building that attracted Russian spies and Irish actors, and in fact it was one of the previous Irish actors, Donald Donnelly, when he'd been on Broadway with Philadelphia Here I Come, who put my parents onto this as a possible place to live. So there was a succession of people came through the place, and in 1970 Borstal Boy arrived on Broadway, trailing its great reviews from the Abbey. The only members of the Abbey cast who were in it were Neil Tobin and Frank Grimes, and Tobin and his family came to live in the same building as us. I became friends with Neil's son Sean, and we palled around, and part of the palling around was being brought backstage to the theatre, and indeed being brought on stage between a matinee and an evening show. So literally my first view from a stage into an auditorium was on Broadway. Wow. And I liked the look of it. And I think that's the origin story I give myself. I think that's where it stems from.
Do you actually, sorry, I'm not being facetious, but did you get that feeling kind of when you did? Do you remember getting that feeling when you kind of stood there kind of going, nice?
Yeah, because particularly the role he was playing of the older being in Borstal Boy, where he is a commentator on the action, he facilitates the action, he's an unreliable narrator, but the power that gave him over the audience was very attractive, and I think, you know, that sort of ability to entertain so actively was very, very interesting. Also, a couple of years later then, when we were back living in Dublin, TP and Donald Donnelly had a huge hit at the Olympia with Sleuth by Anthony Schaffer, and I remember going to see that, and again that because it's such a twisty, turny, you know, audience's expectations of their heads all the time sort of piece and performances, that, you know, just it's very alluring, that kind of, you know, control over an audience.
Yeah. And so what age were you when you came back from New York?
I was 12. So I had this golden period of 3.5 years at the end of the 60s in New York, slammed back into Dublin in the 70s. It was not a pretty picture. It made for a kind of an unpleasant, rather solitary teenage years. So all of this is nothing new to me. I sat in my room for 6 years. I know all about it.
Well, it must have been, I mean, you know, going back to those New York days, I mean, you know, to be there at such a formative time, I suppose, culturally in America, and particularly with, I suppose, in the way, the first wave of, not the first wave, but a wave of Irish kind of plays and actors through, you know, Vegan and through those, you know, very famous
yes,
icons of the Irish theatre. It must, and with Russian spies, it must have been a very kind of exciting time for a pre-teenager to be there.
Absolutely. I mean, it was literally, you know, sort of the height of the anti-Vietnam War movement, flower power. Woodstock happened while we were there. The moon landing happened while we were there. The assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy happened while we were there. So it was life in 3D and surround sound and full screen. So yes, it formed me so much. In a way that probably wouldn't have happened if I'd been, you know, spending those years in Dublin.
And then I just say you come back and you kind of all that, experience is kind of there, but you're hitting a very different, social context or cultural context in Ireland of the early
Yes.
70s. But was the stage or the theater or the entertainment industry, was that still kind of something that bubbled within you, or was it dropped completely out of your head?
It must have continued to bubble because one day I thought out of the blue, my mother said to me, would you be interested in going to the Brendan Smith Academy, which was, I suppose many of our kids go through it nowadays. It was kind of youth theatre on a Saturday afternoon, classes, and then a performance at the end of the year. And the thought had not occurred to me fully formed, but once she said it, I thought, that would be good. Brenda Smith's son, Ronan, was in my class in school, so possibly that triggered it for her. But and he and I, already had a friendship over. I mean, I was a keen theatre goer with my parents right from the time. I mean, we'd seen a couple of shows in New York, and then from the time we came back, seeing shows in the Abbey, seeing shows in the Gate, so I was already enthusiastic as an audience member. But yeah, no, I mean, she must have spotted that it was something that that sort of would not only give me a social life, but that I was clearly interested in. So,
and was reading a big part of your life then as well?
Yeah, yeah, I came. As you can see, I came from a house full of books, and I've built another one. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then, I suppose then talk to me about what happened then when you start going to the Brendan Smith Academy.
Well, I met girls for the first time, which was great, because going to an all boys school, that wasn't happening. So yeah, no, there was a nice social life part of it, but also the end of year performances sort of developed, and had some interesting parts to play and that sort of thing. So those were my first times up on the stage with an audience there, which was terrifying at the start. And I don't know how good I was, but I sort of persisted with it. And then in my final year in school, we were all Europeans then, and there was a drama festival of the European capital cities would each send a production to a festival in Brussels. And some cities chose an existing production, but here they got a theatre director, Nora Lever, who at that stage was best known for not very good school Shakespeare, but she was given the job of casting, directing a production of The Importance of Being Earnest, and myself. So each sort of secondary school in the city sent two people along for audition. I think that was pretty random in our school, but it was myself and Ronan Smith were sent, and we were cast. And what was very interesting was that whereas Nora Lever had been famous for employing, shall we say, her friends and colleagues in her school Shakespeare productions, freed of that, she actually cast it very well. And about half the people she cast, 16 and 17-year-olds, went into the business, and some survive to this day.
Wow. And it's gas as well, sort of 40 odd years later, you kind of the hell in the handbag, it's kind of
yes that was that seed was so there. Yeah, so we went to Brussels. We sort of toured it around the schools, and a final performance in the round room of the Mansion House, one of the acoustically most tricky places I've ever played. And then we went off to Brussels, and we finished third. And the actor playing Jack Worthing won the Best Actor award. Now the distinguished geriatrician Professor Des O'Neill. I was miffed, needless to say, but that my Algernon didn't measure up. But Des has gone on to far more distinguished things since.
And Jonathan, when you came back then in that transition from school to college,
Yeah.
what was there kind of what was in your head then, and when did it become something?
Well, there were a couple of things. I mean, I knew by that stage I wanted to follow this. There wasn't any full-time drama training in Ireland. The Abbey School had shut some years previously, and what we now have was some way away. And there was no particular draw in me for going to London, which was the only other alternative. Also, the deal with my parents was that I got a degree as something to fall back on. So it seemed to make sense to either go to Trinity or to UCD. And at that stage, because the fringe in Dublin was pretty thin on the ground, the drama societies functioned as part of the fringe and were reviewed in the national press. So just judging on the particular strengths at that stage, players in Trinity seemed to be in the ascendant. So I went there. I knew I was going to do history because it was a subject that I had some facility with, and I felt that I could coast through history while devoting myself to the theatre. So yeah, it was history at Trinity purely on that basis, on that I was going to give myself over to college drama while I was there.
It's gas because similarly when I was in UCD, I think it's kind of forgotten now in the younger generations that like all the plays that we did were reviewed in the Times. Some would have been better off if they hadn't have been, but for the ones that kind of became more serious, it was an absolute boon when you headed out of college into the industry to have these professionally reviewed shows.
Yep.
But talk to me about that entrance into those kind of days, into players, into Trinity. Like, did you get a sense of finding a different kind of tribe or finding a different kind of momentum for yourself through those years?
Yeah, immediately, within a year, I sort of got involved in the committee and that sort of thing. And like so many people have been through university drama societies, it gives you a fantastic on-the-job nuts and bolts education on the running of a venue, on the staging of productions, as opposed to just the artistic side. So I found that hugely beneficial. And but also what happened in Trinity was the Old Players Theatre, which was in existence at that stage in the front square, was rented out during the summer to small companies. So within 2 years, I was getting involved in those, and some of those were very good shows and very well run companies, with the result that you were getting a profile then even bigger than for college work. So a succession of productions, one leading to the other, meant I ended up cast in Borstal Boy again, its first revival in Dublin since the Abbey production, at the end of my third year of college, and I got my equity card out of it. So I actually sort of skipped the stage of coming out of college and trying to find my way into the business, because I was already in the business during my final year in college.
Yeah, and maybe just kind of go back to college bit. There was kind of, there's kind of eras and years within each of the kind of dram stocks, but you certainly were in Trinity, or like in and around a time that a lot of people were kind of coming through that would end up, having huge influences on the theatre sector as we know it now and as we knew it then. And was there an awareness at that time that there was something special happening, or was it just barrel on?
I'd love to say there was, but we felt actually that we were getting that we were getting a march stolen on us by Dramsoc, because at the same time Dramsoc produced a tribe of directors: Ben Barnes, Martin Drury, Michael Scott, and Jerry Stembridge, all together in Dramsoc in the same 4 years. Whereas now, I have to say, I turned my hand to the directing myself, and I sent 2 shows in successive years to ISDA, and we acquitted ourselves well. So, but no, unlike the generation that came immediately after me in Trinity, which was the Rough Magic generation, we weren't forging the consciousness of our nation together. It was very much, sort of individuals were making a go of it, actors like Malcolm Douglas and Kate Thompson,
Yeah.
directors like John Comiskey. But no, there wasn't the same tribal push that there was a couple of years later.
So talk to me then, as you emerge and as you say, kind of getting the equity card from, doing the Borstal. But I mean, that must have been quite an experience in that kind of, stretch of a decade from being standing on the, or I mean, I suppose in hindsight, we can kind of view these things, but from standing on a Broadway stage during the interval or and then you're here on it now.
Well, it was, and obviously it was it was a piece that I knew very well, and the smell of it sort of certainly drove me on. And I was a bit cheeky in the way that I sort of finagled my way into what turned out to be the callbacks. But I was also very fortunate that I came at a time when because the opportunities in the profession were so limited, there were very few young people with equity cards. So it was an outlier of a show. 4 of us got our equity cards out of the one show because there was 1 or 2 people in equity at the time under 25, and you're supposed to have 12 16-year-olds for the second half. So you had the elegant sight of Gabriel Byrne in shorts and him a well-built 28-year-old pretending he was 16.
But I think it's funny when we talk about that kind of era. There's a whole like the equity thing, equity cards.
Oh, yeah.
A whole different gateway into the industry. Then that even was talking the other day with someone about kind of getting a few years later, kind of getting the grapevine number off somebody and be able to ring up looking for all those things which kind of are different now.
Yes. Yeah, and actually I very, very quickly, like within a couple of years, I got involved in the Actors Council in equity to try and change those sort of things, to try and change the rules of admission so that some credit would be given for fringe work, for training and that sort of thing. But it was an uphill process,
Yeah.
Because legitimately people were worried that the very few employment opportunities there were being soaked up. You see, there was still a great fear of amateurs, of people in the civil service who would sort of take their annual leave and rehearse a show and then play it at night and that sort of thing, and take the good jobs. Now, that said, this was also a time where you had 40 people roughly on permanent pensionable contracts in the Abbey and another 40 on permanent pensionable contracts in the Radio Air and Rep. So 80 actors full-time employment, sounds like the promised land now, but there was very little other work going apart from that.
It's fascinating though, because you kind of look at two different times, and as you say, those 80 pensionable work jobs against nothing on the ancillary, and now you look, it's gone the complete opposite way with loads kind of happening, with very little chances of employment. But go back to Borstal Boy. I mean, was that obviously it's a huge step up from kind of doing good work in players to on that side of it. And did you feel that was there pressure attached to that, Jonathan?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, because the producer was Noel Pearson, who was the commercial producer at the time, who was basically filling both the Gaiety and the Olympia at the same time with huge cast product. Tomás McConaughey, who directed the original production, was directing it. Neil Tobin, again, reprising the role of the older Bean. Young Jim Sheridan playing the younger Bean, and I mean, not just me making my Gaiety debut, Mick Lally making his Gaiety debut, I think for Gabriel Byrne too. So it was playing with the big boys, and but I did okay, and to the extent that I then got an audition for a Christmas show, which was the Gates 50th anniversary play, for 50th anniversary production, which was a revival of a play of Micheál Mac Liammóir's called Where Stars Walk. And I was cast in the role that Mac Liammóir had written for himself, being directed by and acting alongside Hilton Edwards. So I spent my 21st birthday teching in the gate. And I still hadn't left college at this stage. So I had a glorious year and a half, where just acting work, stage acting work came, in succession. Managed to get my finals in at the same time, continued on like that for maybe one more year, and then it all stopped.
Yeah.
And no, I hadn't blotted my copybook, wasn't doing anything different, but it's just the swings and roundabouts. And because I had no formal training, and particularly no training in the industry, I was completely unprepared for this.
Yeah.
Didn't know what you did to address that at all. So I spent a very quiet year, did a little bit of telly, appeared on Bosco, so I've that on my CV, and then Chris O'Neill had acquired the Oscar Theatre, formerly the Oscar Cinema in Sandymount, and in order to make the bills pay, himself and a few other like-minded people set up a theatre school, offering a 2-year, not a full-time course, but a weekends and evenings course. And because they wanted 2 classes for right from the get-go, so you had one class who were doing their first year and would go on to do their second year, but they offered people who were already in the business a single year to more or less pick up the bits of training that they hadn't got along the way. So a bunch of us did that, and I have to say that saved me in terms of, I might easily have drifted out of the business after the lean times, but sort of I came out of that year with much more of a sense of the dynamic of making your living out of it, a bit of movement training which I hadn't had before, and just more of a sense of how to go about sticking it out.
Interesting, because I think, what an amazing experience though to bring to that, even though it probably didn't feel like it at the time, but having been involved in a couple of years and 2, obviously, as you mentioned, they're 2 seminal works for an awful lot of people, and now the kind of the history of the business that we're in, and to be, acting in the gate at the time of, of McLeamore and Edward, like having that connection, but then that to kind of that to fall away, and for you to go back, if you know what I mean, or to train for the first time, but to go back and take that step back, it kind of, that must have been really nice to be armed with that afterwards. So you've had a bit of experience, or a lot of experience, and now you have so what changed in your approach after that, Jonathan, when you came back out?
I think well, for a start, although it was probably still quite a theatre-based training, we did get much more of a sense of the other places that we could ply our trade. And towards the end of the year in the Oscar, I auditioned for and got one of 4 2-year contracts with the radio rep. Now, that was at the time of civil service recruitment embargoes, and they discovered they couldn't give us the 2-year contracts after all. So for 3 glorious weeks, I thought I had a job for 2 years, and then it was gone. Sorry, but I was fortunate that on the basis of my being about to be hired, I'd been written into one of the radio soaps for 6 months ahead, and somebody had to play the character. So I still got the job as a freelancer. And once I got into RTE, once I got into the radio drama side of things, suddenly you were in people's heads. There were, I think, 5 different drama slots being produced each week, including 2 daily serials. So there was a lot of work out there. And again, like Equity, there weren't too many people under 30.
Yeah.
So they needed younger actors. So I basically from that point, for another 20 years, I did a lot of radio drama on and off, but consistently, and I loved that. And again, it was that income stream, you
Yeah.
know, that if you weren't rehearsing a show or filming something, you know, you get a call on a Thursday. Are you available Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week to record a 1.5 hour drama? Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that sort of multidisciplinary approach, I think, is what saved me. Then I then did during that period, during the mid-80s, I did a lot of telly as well, in RTE, and again, more strings to the bow.
Yeah. And come here, I mean, that's some output in relation to RG drama. I mean, that's a lot of product coming out in
Yeah.
the 80s. And, you know, it's also that very different art forms. You mentioned TV and you mentioned, you know, radio. Radio, yes, was kind of embedded in Irish kind of entertainment culture, but TV was really only, you know, and it was there, but, you know, that, I think the 80s was the first period where it was a big push on homegrown stuff. And I suppose, how did you find working in those mediums?
I loved radio in particular, just because I think my voice and my mind had always been the strengths of my acting, as opposed to my physicality or anything like that. The fact that you could create a fully rounded performance, you know, using those things, was you know, and once you learned the skills and the technical approach to it, you know, and again, you learn by doing. I really enjoyed that. I mean, the television side of things, I think it was kind of hit and miss, and quite often depended on the writing. If the writing was good, you were made up. If the writing was less so, you were struggling. I was fortunate enough to do one of the, as you say, about the blossoming of TV in the 80s. There was a co-production with Channel 4, an adaptation of Hugh Leonard's play A Life, and I did that, and that was quite big budget, though studio based, and obviously the writing was really good. So the finished product there was you know, something to be very proud of.
And in relation to shifting kind of, you know, within the space of months or weeks or years to kind of between theatre, film, and that always interests me from an actor's point of view, is kind of having that different head. I mean, it's the same thing in some ways, but it's a very different headspace from doing something, you know, on a TV set to doing something on one of our stages. And not that you have a preference, but did you find that jumping around between those things, is that something that kind of kept you fresh, or is it something that wrecked your head?
No, I think it kept me fresh. And as you well know, actors are always wanting to do the thing that they're not doing at the moment.
Yeah.
So if they're doing lots of telly, they want to do theatre. If they're only getting theatre, why can't I get a film? You know, it's so yes, the mix, the mix there was both enjoyable and beneficial, I think. Another thing that came along at that time was I started working with Rough Magic a lot in the mid 80s, and so I was doing some of the best theatre work that was getting produced in Dublin at the time. So that ticked that box in spades.
Yeah, I mean, with those times for, you know, I mean, Rough Magic are an incredible company in a lot of different ways, but the freshness they've kind of kept over such a long period. But that period in the mid 80s, you know, was, you know, an extraordinary period for the company, and to be part of that, as I say, was incredible as well. Can I just ask as well then on the, you know, seminal things that I know you're kind of involved in, so pardon me for kind of picking the greatest hits, but obviously you're part of Scrap Saturday around, you know.
Yes, yeah.
That must have been some experience.
That was some experience. No, what happened there was, I mean, it was into its second series by the time I got involved, and for various reasons, there were some weeks that Owen Rowe wasn't available. He was doing theatre or whatever, and so I had worked with Jerry Stembridge before. Dermot Morgan didn't know me, but I'd worked with Jerry, I'd worked with Pauline before, and I was kind of drafted in for a few episodes, not sequential, as a sub Owen, you know, give your PJ Mara, and then various other things would be thrown at you. And even when Owen came back, I I kept being brought back to do Miles Dungan because there was a running gag which, based on a true court report, which I think it was a radio interview that that Miles did, where the court reporter delivered the immortal line, and it was at that point, Miles, that the dog bit the guard on the penis. So Dermot Morgan loved this, and he kept taking some event of the week and turning it into a court case, which would always end with that immortal line. So even if I wasn't doing anything else on the show that week, I'd be brought in to do Miles Dungan to Dermot's court reporter for the end of the show.
That series, I mean, actually through my college days, you know, that was kind of, it was like, you know, whereas in school there was not the 9 o'clock news that was on Monday morning or whatever morning was, you go in, just the whole school would talk about it for a day. Like in Dramsock, in, you know, when I was there, like the recounting of sketches, I mean, that's such a, I mean, and for people that, you know, weren't adulted back then, it had such an influence on our Irish culture and society. And I think, and did you know that when it was kind of happening?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously I was more of a hired gun than the others, but they had a fair idea, and Dermot in particular had a fair idea of the power. So one week, in her innocence, Madeleine Taylor Quinn, the Fine Gael TD for Clare, got up in the Dáil and gave out about Scrap Saturday, and basically from then on, they went for her, calling her mad dog. And, you know, so this thing of politicians wanting to be involved and wanting to be portrayed, it was fine as long as you were nice about them. And they had this lovely, cuddly version of Michael Noonan, morning, noon and night, which he absolutely adored. But if they didn't like you, they could make life hot and heavy.
But it's gas. It wasn't, you know, it was a kind of really interesting era, both on both sides of the water, because, you know, just before that, you had, you know, the birth of Spitting Image over in the UK, and that whole kind of satire place was, I think it has infected, you know, certainly affected RTE, and in a very good way, kind of it challenged outputs which were great. Talk to me about then, you know, theatre from that. I mean, you know, you look at your CV, you've done so much amazing stuff, but you've worked as well, like you worked with Passion Machine, Rough Magic, you know, obviously the Abbey, but that sense of, it was a very different place, you know, and, you know, Ireland changed hugely then between, say, the mid-80s and the late 90s. And the arts was kind of very much at the centre, even though it mightn't have thought it at the time, but it was very much at the centre of all that.
Yeah. An event I always think of is the Parade of Innocence, which I think did a huge amount to change the middle ground opinion on the subject of the Birmingham Six. You know, it suddenly took it from the, you know, sort of socialist worker posters on the lampposts to this huge explosion of colour and culture on the streets for a political cause. And you know, the fact that, you know, somebody like Paul Mercier could harness the great skill and talent that was out there and create this, you know, mind-blowing event. I mean, that was before any of your colourful St. Patrick's Day parades or anything like this, and something like that just, I think, epitomizes the confidence there was in the cultural community at the time.
And it kind of seemed, looking back on it now, it seems so out of time as well. It was just kind of this, you know, explosion of many different things, from, like, you know, your mainstream cultural to the work Paul with Passion Machine, to work from the City Arts Centre, to work from Wet Penny, to work from established theatre. It kind of all just coalesced into this kind of place. And actually looking through your work, you know, whether by happenstance or whether by, you know, coincidence or whatever, politics has played, you know, you've kind of found yourself, or, you know, you've been in parts and plays.
Yeah.
And is that kind of interest you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, no, I think I'm following my nose there, but also the sort of actor I am, I tend to get cast in authority figure parts. Also, for good or for ill, versatility is one of the things I do. So if a production needs people who are going to play 5 or 6 different parts reasonably well, as opposed to one part brilliantly, I'm the first one. So a lot of the productions you're referencing are ones where as much of the job was portraying lots of different characters as opposed to just one.
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking here when you're talking that that I think you underdo yourself in relation to your skill, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But I think in relation to, there's obviously, in a way, kind of the most recent Saturday-esque was kind of Anglo the Musical back in
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
When was that? That was 2000
It was 2012.
really, Jesus.
Yeah.
But like that, again, in a very different way with similar kind of things was kind of, and that was very recent. I mean, that was kind of on the money as it went, and I'd say that was a really interesting rehearsal process.
It was frightening. I mean, Paul Howard in particular still has nightmares about it. I mean, the whole enterprise was treacherous from the start, in that we were opening a brand new Irish musical in the Bord Gáis,
Yeah.
as opposed to anywhere smaller. We were opening it with one preview, and on the morning of that one preview, when we were halfway through teching a very big complex show with music, moving sets and giant puppets, our producers came and said, we have had a letter from the DPP. We have to cut 5 different scenes, including this big number at the end of the first act. And we have to go ahead with the preview tonight, so that Sean Fitzpatrick's solicitors can come along and have the opportunity to injunct the production in the High Court tomorrow morning. But continue on with your work. So literally we were, cutting and pasting and saying, okay, I can cover that. You see that cut there? What if I did this? And literally, it was at the stage where, and I mean, Michael Barker-Caden, who was directing, was doing his level best too. But I have to say my admiration for colleagues like Mark O'Regan in particular, who was playing the principal role in the first half, and who had this big number at the end of the first half that was now gone, and just taking it on himself. No, I'll manage those cuts, you come in with this, and that sort of thing. So literally 5 to 7 we finished the tech, and the preview went up at 7:30, and we didn't have a dress rehearsal or anything like that. And I have never been as proud of being part of a company of actors as that night. Whatever it was artistically, the achievement, the professionalism in getting the thing on was second to none.
And come here, in relation then to, there's, like, you've done a huge amount of Shakespeare with Second Age and others, and then you've done a huge amount of new work, with, like, from new musicals to, and we'll talk about Ellen the Handbag now in a minute. And then obviously, you're one of the lucky ones who can bring Father Ted with you wherever you go. I mean, that was
my 50 seconds of fame. Listen. I mean, I've always said it's the one thing that my children aren't ashamed of when mentioning the fact that their father's an actor. But I mean, there was lovely kerfuffle on the social media this week with the 25th anniversary of the first showing, and my sister said something that I never heard her say before. She said it's her go-to small talk / name drop when she goes to a dinner party, that the fact that her brother was in Father Ted. So how bad, it was a glorious experience. I was not part of the shoots in Ennisdiamond. Literally just did a week's rehearsal in London and shot it on a Friday night in front of a studio audience, and that was it. And here we are 25 years on, and it lives.
Amazing, and it does, and it grows kind of it grows in its life year on year. It's absolutely
Yep.
incredible. Talk to me then about the other aspects of your work in relation to the writing, producing, that piece. When did that start to kind of, yeah, when did that journey towards, like, I'm not just telling the handbag, but just generally that kind of path?
You won't be surprised to hear that I put it down to one man, Carl Shields. I listening to Amelia talking to you earlier in the week, I vividly remember a night, the Irish Times Theatre Awards in the Royal Hospital, so maybe 2011, 2012, sometime around then, Carl, as only Carl could, buttonholing me and saying, "You should write something. You've got something in you. I've a smell of you." And um, once heard, never forgotten line. But it was extraordinary, the permission that gave me. I had written for Nighthawks when it was on TV, sketch material, but I had never given myself the permission to think of myself as a even a potential writer. So I knuckled down and I started writing a two-hander for the stage. Around the same time as we were doing Anglo, and made the fatal flaw in hindsight of picking a deeply serious topic full of great emotion, and that wasn't for me. And at the same time as that was happening, I was seeing the various Shona Bags from that era, Swing and Pat McGrath's Small Plastic Wars, which is one of my favorites. And they were so good and so funny. And I was thinking, oh, why am I doing that? So eventually the very serious play met its inevitable quiet end and never saw the light of day. And then 2016, chance conversation with my friend Helen Norton. We had a running joke between us that somebody should cast us as Miss Prism and Canon Chasuble in The Importance of Being Earnest, but they spectacularly failed to again and again. And the Gate had just done it and failed to cast us again. And as a parting shot, one of us said, "Sure, we'll have to write it ourselves." And literally the next day into my email inbox came the final reminder for Shona Bag. And I mentioned this laughingly at dinner to my wife and my sister and my daughters. And they all turned serious on me and said, "You should do that." And so I said, "Oh." And so I rang Helen. I said, "Should we think about this?" And so we got together and said, "Well, okay, what if, and there's this." So we put an application in, more in hope than in certainty. Found ourselves chosen to do it. The one thing they said to us, they looked at us and said, "And will it be funny?" And we looked at each other after 40 years of comedy character acting between us and said, "Yes, it'll be funny." And away we went, and we've had 3 brilliant years with it. We finished up last in Bewley's last August. And sorry, months have gone by now, never mind days. Yeah, but we've done it 130 times. We had a sellout run with it in Edinburgh. We had a great tour of England with it as part of Culture Ireland's 2018 program. It's been just an absolute pleasure to do, and still is. We put it up for people to see for 24 hours at the start of the lockdown, and lots of friends in lots of parts of the world who haven't got to see it so far got to see it then. So yeah, no, it's been a joy.
And has that like, how was that for you after so many years of acting? And obviously you've written, as I said, for Nighthawks and other things, but like in relation to playing something you wrote, how was that in relation to you stepping back from, how was that process?
Well, it's been a game changer for me in that what I was saying about Carl giving me permission to think about writing, the success of the handbag gave me permission to think of myself as a writer. I now say it in polite company. And I've gone on now. I'm working on a screenplay with Stephen Bradley. We've been working on it for 2 years, but that's mainly down to me. And I have 2 other theatre pieces in various stages of gestation, let's say. So it's given me it's given me some something else to consider myself.
Yeah, but it's fascinating, and I won't keep much longer, but I think it's fascinating, that space of change that kind of can happen to us all over, and it's kind of, and it's very difficult because, you know, whether you're older or younger, whatever it is kind of, if you're seen as one thing. And I think certainly the era that, you know, certainly when I came out of college in the early 90s and mid 90s, there was kind of sense you had to be one thing, and you couldn't, which is now completely anathema. Like now it's the skills. If you did loads of stuff back then, you must have been shite at the mall equally. Now it's kind of, it's great. So I think for renewing that for yourself must be a very enervating thing, you know, a very kind of exciting thing.
It is, absolutely. And also I think I was slightly envious of my younger colleagues. I've been fortunate enough in recent years to work with the next generation. Particularly, I did Hamlet last autumn with a number of students who'd come out of the Gaiety School, and through their manifesto strand, where they're sent into the world armed not only with that skill, but with the confidence to consider themselves makers of work rather than guns for hire.
Yeah. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And for those who might find this somewhere in the depths of the internet in 10 years' time, this is kind of April the 20-something. I don't know what day it is anymore, but we're right in the end of a kind of beginning of COVID-19 kind of pandemic and fallout from same. So it's great to be able to connect with people even through the virtual space. So yes, thanks a million.
Thanks, Mark.
No worries.